Hey everybody, welcome back. This week we're going to be going over chapter 15, self-confidence. It should be a fairly quick chapter. There's some good stuff in the textbook, and we'll be touching on some of the more important things that I want you to know and understand, especially for the next exam. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so first we want to define what self-confidence is. And so self-confidence is the belief that you can successfully perform a desired behavior, right? This is sort of talking more generally, whether how confident you are in sport or how confident you are at your job, at work. When we say self-confidence, we're generally talking about something general and not quite as specific. And we'll get to self-efficacy in just a little bit, but that is what we are referring to when we're talking about self-confidence, your belief that you can do something. Self-confidence can be both dispositional and state-like. So those are the two types of self-confidence that you can have. And so what are the two? So dispositional, you think of the term disposition, that essentially means something innate, right? Something you were sort of born with, and it's just who you are. And so dispositional self-confidence is the degree of certainty individuals usually have about their ability to succeed. And again, this is more stable. It doesn't change your general self-confidence about who you are and your level of ability to succeed. And so state confidence is what we consider to be situational, right? So it's the belief of certainty that individuals have in a particular moment in time about their ability to succeed, right? So you think about certain situations you're in. For example, I like to use the example of driving here in Morgantown, right, with all the hills, compared to driving where I'm from, which is California, where we don't have as much hills. And so in terms of the confidence I have in driving, pretty generally, I feel like I'm a really good driver. But when it comes to icy roads during the winter here in Morgantown, where there are hills, in those particular situations, my state self-confidence drops down dramatically. So again, state self-confidence is this situational type of confidence, depending on what situation you're in. And then dispositional is more stable, just your general confidence in yourself. And so what are the benefits of self-confidence? I'm sure if we think about it, we can come up with these on our own, but here are a few that are mentioned in the book. One of them, it arouses positive emotions, right? When we're feeling good about ourselves, our self-talk tends to be a lot better. And so if we're feeling good, if we're thinking positive things, we are likely to perform better. It facilitates concentration. If we know what we're doing, if we feel good about it, then we're able to focus a lot better on what we have to do. It affects the setting and pursuit of challenging goals. So if you're confident, you're likely to have more of that achievement motivation, right? So setting more challenging goals so that you continue to get better, as opposed to those other type of lower achievement goals where you're just setting them as low as possible because you're not confident that you can succeed. And we all want to succeed, but not having that confidence will likely make that level of goal a lot lower. It increases effort. It affects psychological momentum. Again, I talked about some of that positive self-talk that usually comes with this. And then all in all of this affects performance. And so I do really quickly want to talk about self-fulfilling prophecy and how our confidence can essentially make or break us, right? If we are confident and we're expecting something to happen, usually that is what's going to happen. And this can go both ways. It can go negatively and it can go positively. Usually self-fulfilling prophecy is more notable because it's a negative outcome and it's this vicious cycle, right? So first you expect failure, right? Because you're not confident. This leads to actual failure of whatever it is you're doing. And so that failure lowers, again, your self-image of yourself and even lowers your confidence even more. And then that increases expectations of future failure, right? So if you expect to fail, you fail, your confidence gets even lower. And then it's this vicious cycle where you just keep thinking that you're going to continue to fail. And a really cool example of this is a picture here you see of Roger Bannister, who was basically the first person to break this 4-minute mile. All the years leading up to this, people tried so hard to beat the 4-minute mile, and people got really close, but just couldn't seem to do it. And so all these years, people think that, nope, it's absolutely impossible to do it, right? They're expecting that, nope, no one can do it, so no one does it. And then Roger Bannister comes along, finally does it, beats the 4-minute mile. And since he's done that, people now are able to do it, not easily, but more people are able to do it, right? As opposed to before when people thought that this was impossible. So there's that self-fulfilling prophecy, people not thinking that it's possible to do, and they weren't able to do it. And so once that script flipped, it's more possible now. It's possible now. They are able to positively self-fulfill this task. Okay, and then really quickly, just want to mention these levels of confidence and how that can be associated with our performance. As you can see here, this is demonstrated by an inverted U, where here at the bottom, we see being underconfident can result in low performance, which makes sense, right? If we're not confident, we're not going to do well in whatever it is. Then it slowly increases as we gain confidence to this level that's sort of optimal at this top of the U here. This is our optimal zone of confidence, right? Where we're performing our highest and our confidence is just where it needs to be. And then there's just this quick and short threshold where overconfidence can be detrimental to our performance. And, that can be due to a lot of things, maybe putting less effort because you're not being challenged or things like that. So again, it's good to have this high level of confidence, but there is opportunity for it to just make you decrease in terms of performance level. So just want to be aware of that and be aware of what levels of confidence can look like. Okay, so now we're going to talk about self-efficacy, which still is very much almost exactly like self-confidence, right? It's basically the state-like situation-specific term for self-confidence. Okay, so we want to make sure we really just understand the different nuances between the two. They're very, very slight. Like I think I mentioned, these two terms were used interchangeably in the book. So they essentially mean the same thing with just a slight nuance. So self-confidence, like I said, is this general belief in oneself. It's not specific to anything at all. So it's just a very general confidence level that you have about yourself. Self-efficacy, on the other hand, is the perception of one's ability to complete a specific task. So very, very situation specific. And we're talking about tasks here. So let's say self-confidence, I'm generally very confident in how I write and my writing. I'm generally a very confident student. So that's general, so to speak, self-confidence. And then when it comes to self-efficacy, you want to sort of narrow that down more into a specific task. When I think about this good at writing self-confidence that I have, that can shift if I make this more specific, right? Maybe my self-efficacy for writing a book is very low because 1, have I done it before? Absolutely not. 2, do I have the skills? Maybe. I don't know how to do it or how even the process for it, but so that would make my self-efficacy for writing a book a lot lower, right? As opposed to my self-confidence in writing, pretty confident in it. But if you make it more specific, that can change. And then again, with this good student confidence, put me in a situation where I am taking like the SAT or the GRE. My self-efficacy for test taking, those standardized tests, is completely different than my self-confidence in being a student, right? So there, you see those slight differences between self-confidence and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is definitely more specific, and it refers to a specific task. And so here we can see how social cognitive theory works, and basically how these three factors influence each other and influence the way we end up behaving, right? So we have personal factors, we have environmental factors, and our behavior. And all these things are reciprocated and essentially influence and cause one another, right? So we see that cognitions, which include self-efficacy, so how we think we're going to do something, how that influences behavior, right? So if I think I can do this, it will lead me to doing it or believing that I will do it. And then we also see that behavior also influences the cognitions, right? So that's sort of reciprocated. We have thoughts causing our behaviors, and then our behaviors causing our thoughts. So I did this, right? I ran a 4-minute mile, which leads to me having the confidence of doing the 4-minute mile again. And then third, we have the environment can influence cognitions. And we see that when we talk about the situations that we put ourselves in, right? Depending on the environment and what you need to do and what resources you have, that'll influence your cognition or how you perceive yourself to do something, your self-efficacy for how you're going to handle that situation. Okay, so this is probably the more important slide that you need to know, that you need to memorize and understand. I apologize. I don't know if you can see the sources of self-efficacy, but these are the 6 sources of self-efficacy, right? This is where self-efficacy comes from. Being able to understand this can help you to increase your self-efficacy. And as you can see, these things cause self-efficacy, which then influences our behaviors, our affect, which is our feelings, and lastly, our cognitions, our thoughts. So these things help self-efficacy, which in turn lead to who we are, the way we feel, talk, and think. Okay, so please know these 6 sources and be able to come up with specific examples. Okay, so first, and this is in order of what is the strongest source of self-efficacy, essentially, right? And so the number one thing is performance accomplishments. So knowing that you have carried a task out successfully, that is the biggest source of self-efficacy you can have. And we saw that, again, I'm going to keep going back to this self-fulfilling prophecy example of the 4-minute mile. Knowing that I did it in the past will increase my self-efficacy in that task, right? That's what happened with Roger Bannister. That's what happened with the people who came after Roger Bannister. Knowing that you can do something and that you've done it already successfully will lead to higher self-efficacy. Okay, then we have vicarious experience. The behavior of others, so using the behavior of others as a reference. So again, this is actually a better example of the 4-minute mile in terms of the other people, not Roger Bannister, right? So when other people saw that Roger Bannister can do it, they in turn use this vicarious experience. So living, you've heard the term living vicariously through somebody, imagining and putting yourself in their shoes, that will increase your self-efficacy as well, which it did, right? It allowed them to see themselves in Roger Bannister and also accomplish that 4-minute mile. Okay, then we have verbal persuasion, which is the provision of information and encouragement. And this is self-explanatory, right? We have verbal persuasion that can come from ourselves, and that can also come from external resources, right? Coaches, family members, parents, friends, people who are encouraging you, people who are giving you positive feedback, those also tend to help us and increase our self-efficacy and our self-confidence, okay? Pretty easy to think about. Next, we have imaginal experiences. So this is more of a visualizing and imagery practice. And so being able to visualize that you have successfully completed a task is also a source of self-efficacy. And we'll learn a lot about imagery in towards the latter end of the class, but these are also ways, and these can be taught, right? Imagery can be taught as a skill, which can increase self-efficacy, which is a good skill to know and have. Next, we have physiological states, and this is just referring to more of the physical reactions we have after we've done something. So heart rate, right, can be a positive thing sometimes, increasing your adrenaline, things like that. Muscle soreness or sweating, those can be sort of negative ways to contribute to self-efficacy, right? If you have these physiological experiences, then it's sort of your mind telling you like, hey, you're nervous. Maybe you're not as confident as you are, right? So you can sort of see how the physiological states can be positive and negative in helping or affecting self-efficacy. And then lastly, we have emotional states. So feelings of excitement, worry, fear, again, a lot of positive, negative outcomes that can come out of this depending on what those states are, but those feelings do also affect self-efficacy. So being able to change your thoughts so that it changes your feelings about the situation can help. Okay, so those are the 6 that you will want to know and understand and be able to come up with examples. And so here I'm just going to share this video again, sort of to just better hit these home and maybe give you another way of looking at it. So here's a video on the sources of self-efficacy.
Tackling goals, big and small, can be a challenge for all of us. But setting goals and pursuing them is important to get to where you want to go. Sometimes a goal can be daunting, seeming too tough to tackle. That's when your self-efficacy matters most. Self-efficacy is the belief in your own ability to succeed in achieving a goal. Having the confidence to know you can do whatever you set your mind to by managing how you think, feel, and behave. Having high self-efficacy helps you get your thoughts, feelings, and emotions under control, have better grades, and set higher goals in school, making you feel good all around. And when you feel good about a goal, you're more likely to give it your best effort. There are 5 ways that can help you develop your self-efficacy. By recalling times when you have succeeded in the past through your own hard work and strengths. For example, remembering the last time you earned an A on a difficult test by asking others for help and studying hard can help you feel more confident when you're up against the next one. Pulling from your own experiences of success has the strongest influence on your self-efficacy. When you see how others like you are successful at achieving a goal, it also makes you feel more capable of your own success. It's like when you watched your friend train for a big race and win, and it made you feel better about your own ability to win at your next big race. Helpful feedback and coaching from others can also help your self-efficacy grow stronger. When someone you trust encourages you by reminding you of your own strengths and abilities, it can help you overcome your own self-doubt, like when your teacher coaches you through solving a complicated math problem. Sometimes it can be helpful to imagine yourself accomplishing a task. The images you see in your mind can be inspired by any of the things I just mentioned, like imagining solving the math problem before you even start trying or celebrating at the finish line before the race. Finally, learning how to read your body and emotions can also help you feel more ready to step up to the plate. We all get nervous when we have to do something challenging, but when we read those feelings and emotions in a positive way, such as feeling excited instead of anxious, it helps us think about the situation in a completely different way. Having positive emotions and moods builds your self-efficacy, making you feel more optimistic about what's up ahead. The more you become skilled at using these experiences and influences, the more self-efficacy you will build in pursuit of future similar endeavors. It doesn't mean it'll be easy. It just means that you believe you can make it happen. Having a high sense of self-efficacy can help increase your sense of agency, self-regulation, growth mindset, and perseverance, making you more likely to set and stick to challenging goals, motivating you to work hard and succeed, and giving you the courage to try new things. Those around you can help you by giving you good feedback, reminding you of your strengths and abilities, and helping you bounce back from setbacks. And when you do this for others, you can help build their self-efficacy too. So, next time you're taking on a new challenge, remember that believing in yourself is the first step in taking you to new heights.
Okay, so that was just a really awesome video. They mentioned 5 sources of self-efficacy just because they combined the last 2, the physiological and emotional states. So just keep in mind that there are 6 in this class. There are 6. Okay, but great summary there. Oops. All right, so we're going to talk just a little bit about sports self-confidence. It's this is a sports psychology class, so I did want to talk a little bit about it. There are slightly more sources of sports self-confidence. As you can see here, there are 9, as opposed to the sources of self-efficacy. But that's just because there are a few more specific things within the sport context that can help. But for the purposes of the exam, I just want you to know the 6 sources of self-efficacy. Okay, so this is just some, I guess, extra information considering this is a sports psychology class. Okay, so here you can see the 9 sources of sports self-confidence. A lot of this is the same as, or can fit into the other sources that we just learned. We have mastery, demonstration of ability, right? So knowing that you did something, it's essentially past performance. We have physical and mental preparation, physical self-presentation. So that's referring to the sociological states. We have social support and coaches leadership. That can all fall under That can all fall under verbal persuasion, right? Having that support. We have vicarious experience, environmental comfort, and situational favorableness, right? So how well is the situation you're in? And knowing if you're in a good place, then that will increase your sports self-confidence. Okay, so they have really good explanations of this in your book if you want to go into it a little more. Again, we don't need to specifically know these ones for this class, but it's always good to just see the sport-related aspects of self-confidence. We will talk about some do's and don'ts, right? So what are ways to build self-confidence in people? So here are the do's. We have do maintain a high positive pre-competitive environment. So this goes with this is mostly a coach responsibility, right? So to create this environment that people essentially practice in, right? And helping them to build that confidence through different tasks that you have prior to competition. We should also be setting realistic but challenging short and long-term goals, which we heard a little bit about in the video as well. Provide lots of contingent positive feedback and praise. So this is one that's really important. We talked about feedback in the last chapter, but in order to build self-confidence, right, you want to make sure that the feedback you're giving is constructive and positive. So this is where that feedback sandwich comes in. We know that not everyone can get everything right the first time, even the second, third, fourth time, but we want to make sure that we are not putting people down so that their self-confidence lowers. We want to make sure that what we're telling and what sort of feedback we're giving is constructive, and it will continue to help them build confidence rather than lower it, right? So that's where that feedback sandwich comes in. Talk about what you're doing well, here's how you can tweak it, and then encouraging them that, hey, they can do this, they got it. Being able to make sure that you're very constructive in the way you're giving feedback, even if it is negative. Do structure the environment to provide for early success. Again, this is more of a coach responsibility, coach leadership style, especially if you have athletes who are in the beginning stages. Maybe you have some youth athletes that you're working with, and they obviously are not confident in what they're doing yet, right? They have just started to learn. And so structuring your environment, structuring your practices so that they feel like they are continuing to improve and get better and master their skill. Those are going to be really important in building self-confidence, especially early on. Lastly, do try to find participants doing something right? So don't just look for their mistakes. This goes back to the positive feedback situation that we just talked about. Working on strengths, focusing on strengths more than so just looking at what they are doing wrong. There's a lot of good strengths-based research that is starting to happen, and coaches are starting to realize how important that is rather than always looking for the negative. All right. And then lastly, we have some don'ts. Don't use sarcasm. Don't use put downs to motivate people. It doesn't work. It may motivate them in the time or in the situation that they're in at that time, but in the long run, you are not helping with their self-confidence at all. Don't allow teammates or group members to belittle other team or group members. So creating that sort of safe space and environment for mistakes, and recognizing effort and emphasizing effort, and making sure everyone else on the team knows that. Don't criticize participants for inconsequential errors. That goes back to the feedback situation that we're talking about. Don't embarrass or criticize participants at the first sign of a mistake. Again, feedback sandwich. This is essentially saying don't harp on them after every single mistake, right? Maybe if you notice a mistake, wait a little bit, see what's going on, right? Don't comment on it every single time. Give them some chances to get it right, and then provide your feedback. And then lastly, don't ever make it personal. Don't ever criticize the person, criticize the behavior. Not associating the mistake with the person and who they are and their identity. Rather, just criticize the behavior and let them know how to fix it. I think that's pretty obvious and self-explanatory. And so that's it. Okay, thanks everyone for joining me this week. I will see you all next week. Have a good one.